How can one sleep on ground that has become harder than granite due to severe frost? The air in such conditions becomes so icy that every breath burns the lungs like red-hot iron. In this environment, stopping movement often meant certain death for anyone unprepared. But the Native Americans of North America fell asleep in these conditions completely calmly, without fear of not waking up in the morning. Their secret was not in fighting the cold, but in knowing how to negotiate with it. Watch the video to the end to learn how the proper use of snow could save lives and why a fur blanket alone was never enough to keep you warm. What if I told you that everything you believed was not true? We are used to thinking that for a comfortable night's sleep, it is necessary to heat the entire room we are in, from floor to ceiling. European settlers who arrived in the New World built huge stone fireplaces in an attempt to heat their drafty log cabins, but often failed and froze. The Indians of the Great Plains approached this issue in a completely different way, acting more cunningly and economically. Their main task was not to heat the air in the entire teepee, but to create and maintain a microclimate at a specific point. They sought to conserve heat directly around the sleeping person, creating a kind of cocoon. This unique philosophy of survival was formed over centuries of trial and error in the harsh conditions of the continental climate. The indigenous people understood perfectly well that trying to heat the entire volume of a dwelling at -40 degrees was a futile and dangerous waste of resources. Firewood on the endless plains was too valuable and rare a resource to burn thoughtlessly to heat the empty space above one's head. Instead, they focused on creating small, insulated capsules of warmth where life could thrive. This was the principle of targeted energy conservation long before the term existed. The first and most important step was to create a reliable barrier between the body and the deeply frozen ground. In winter, the earth turned into an icy vampire that sucked the life out of the body faster than the coldest wind. If out of ignorance you lay down on skins carelessly thrown on the ground, the cold would instantly penetrate them and reach your bones. Therefore, the Indians used complex, multi-layered structures, reminiscent in their function of modern orthopedic mattresses. The basis of this bed was skillfully woven mats made of elastic willow rods. These mats not only leveled the surface, but also created the necessary air gap at ground level. The air trapped in the voids between the rods acted as an excellent natural insulator, breaking the thermal bridge with the ground. The cold from the ground could not overcome this air barrier and reach the bed. Rough, thick skins of old animals were laid on top of these springy willow mats, fur side down. This created an additional protective layer against moisture, which inevitably rose from the soil thawed by body heat. Only after this waterproof base had been created did the laying of the main sleeping area from the softest bison skins begin. This clever layered system allowed people to sleep on the ground even when a snowstorm raged outside for days on end. The heat of the human body did not escape uselessly into the frozen ground, but was reflected back to the sleeper. It was the principle of a thermos, ingeniously implemented using the simplest natural materials. The Indians created a closed thermal circuit, inside which the temperature was absolutely comfortable for living and resting. It is important to note that preparing for sleep was a ritual that began long before nightfall. Skins and mats were always taken out into the open air or dried by the fire to remove the slightest moisture from them. Dryness was the main and indispensable condition for retaining heat in extreme cold. Even a small amount of moisture or sweat in the bed could turn to ice and lead to severe hypothermia by morning. Bed care was a matter of survival. Every member of the tribe, from children to the elderly, knew how to properly fluff matted fur. This was done to allow more air to get between the fibers and make it fluffier. The more air retained in the structure of the fur, the better the skin retained precious body heat. This knowledge was passed down from generation to generation as the main science of survival in the steppe. A mistake or negligence in preparing the bed could cost the health or even the life of the entire family. Interestingly, this system worked equally well for a lone hunter on a hunt and for a large group in a camp. The principle of reliable insulation from below and heat retention from above remained unchanged in all conditions. Only the size of the shelter and the number of skins used changed depending on the situation. This technology allowed nomadic peoples to feel at home wherever they stopped. We are very interested to hear your opinion on these methods. What do you think about this approach to heat conservation? Write about it in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any new survival stories. Want to know a secret that will forever change your perception of primitive dwellings? A tipi is not just a tent made of skins on sticks, as many people tend to think when they look at pictures. It is a complex engineering structure, the shape of which is ideally suited for regulating airflow. The outer shell of bison hide provided reliable protection from storm winds and precipitation, but the main secret of warmth was hidden inside. The Indians used a clever inner lining called an ozan or diwali. This lining, made of thinner leather or fabric, was attached to supporting poles at human height. It descended to the ground, fitting snugly to the bottom, and ran around the entire perimeter of the dwelling. It created an insulated air pocket or corridor between the icy outer wall of the teepee and the warm living space. The cold air, which always penetrates from below under the outer covering, did not enter the dwelling where people lived. Obeying the laws of physics, it rose up this corridor, creating excellent draft for the smoke from the fire. Thanks to this effect, there were practically no drafts inside the teepee at the level of the living area. And it is precisely drafts that usually blow all the heat out of poorly insulated rooms. The result was an effective double wall that worked on the principle of modern double-glazed windows. The interior space remained protected from direct contact with the icy outside environment, maintaining comfort. This allowed the temperature difference between the inside and outside to be maintained at tens of degrees. In winter, the space between the outer covering and the inner lining was often additionally filled with dry steppe grass. This created a powerful additional layer of insulation, several tens of centimeters thick all around. This dense sandwich of leather and grass retained heat even better than the thick wooden walls of European houses. The grass trapped still air inside, which is known to be the best insulator in nature. In such a warm teepee, it was possible to sit without outer clothing, even in the frost. The entrance to the teepee, as the weakest point of any structure, was also carefully designed to retain heat. The doorway was covered with a heavy skin on a frame, which acted as a solid door. This curtain fit tightly to the edges of the entrance under its own weight, leaving no gaps for the wind to enter. Sometimes, for reliability, double doors were made, creating a kind of vestibule to keep the cold out. The conical shape of the dwelling itself contributed to the efficient distribution of heat from the central hearth. Warm air rose up to the smoke hole, but was reflected off the sloping walls and descended back down. This ensured constant heat circulation in the lower living area of the teepee, where people slept. Smoke valves at the very top allowed for precise control of the draft without completely cooling the room. Controlling these upper valves with long poles was a real art. Their position was constantly changed depending on the direction and strength of the wind, so that the smoke would not blow back inside. A properly adjusted teepee literally breathed, providing a flow of fresh air without losing precious heat. This prevented the accumulation of dangerous carbon monoxide, preserving the oxygen necessary for breathing. In winter, the floor inside the teepee was often completely covered with an additional layer of coniferous branches, such as pine or fir. Fresh pine branches not only gave off a pleasant forest aroma that overpowered the smell of smoke, but also served as an additional layer of insulation. On top of this springy coniferous carpet, skins were laid out for walking and sitting on. The cold ground was completely hidden under a thick, multi-layered carpet of organic material. Did you know about such a complex and well-thought-out ventilation system in seemingly simple dwellings? In the next chapter, you will learn how the skins were processed to become the perfect blanket. Guess how long it took to create this perfect blanket? The processing of a single bison hide was an extremely complex technological process that took weeks of hard physical labor and required incredible skill. It was not just the skin removed from a killed animal, carelessly thrown on the floor for softness. The Indians transformed the stiff, tree-like, and unwieldy raw hide into a soft, elastic, and warm material. The secret lay in a special method of chemical and mechanical treatment that preserved the natural properties of the fur, but changed the structure of the skin. The winter bison hide had unique thermal insulation properties that were unmatched by other natural materials of the time. The thick, curly undercoat and long, stiff guard hairs created an air cushion of incredible density. This fur was so effective that snow falling on the back of a live bison did not melt for hours. The animal's body heat simply did not pass through the fur to the outside, remaining inside. It was this property of absolute insulation that the Indians used to organize their night's rest. The women of the tribe carefully cleaned the inside of the hide of any remaining fat, membranes, and meat using special scrapers. The skin was then generously treated with a mixture of the animal's own brain and liver, which acted as a natural softener. The enzymes contained in the organs broke down the tough fibers, making the skin pliable. After that, the long and exhausting process of kneading and stretching the skin with hands and ropes began. The women worked day after day because this was the only way to prevent the skin from stiffening in the cold. The finished bison skin blanket weighed a lot, but this impressive weight was a guarantee of survival in the harsh winter. The heavy skin, under its own weight, fit snugly against the sleeper's body, leaving no pockets of cold air. It worked like a kind of press, reliably trapping the accumulated heat inside the cocoon. Under such a heavy blanket, a person was completely isolated from the outside environment. No draft could lift the edge of such a heavy cover. Indians often used several layers of such skins to create a full-fledged sleeping place. The bottom layer was placed fur side up to create a soft, springy, and warm base instead of a mattress. The top layer was laid with the fur facing down, so that it was in direct contact with the body or clothing of the sleeper. The fibers of the top and bottom layers clung to each other like Velcro, creating a single impermeable barrier. Interestingly, old, worn, and partially bald skins were never thrown away. They were rationally used for the bottom layers of bedding, insulating the bed from the ground. They still coped well with the cold coming from the ground, and it was not a pity to get them dirty. New, fluffiest, and thickest skins were always used for covering the top, where heat preservation was critical. It was a wise economy of resources, where every item served people until it was completely worn out. In particularly severe frosts, whole skins were used, on which the head and tail of the animal were deliberately left. This had not only a ritual significance of reverence for the spirit of the beast, but also a purely practical meaning. Such a skin better retained its anatomical shape and covered the shoulders and legs without slipping off during restless sleep. People literally wrapped themselves in the skin, hiding in it like in a protective cocoon. Caring for such fur blankets was a daily chore, necessary for the family's survival. Every morning they were taken outside and shaken out in the cold to remove dust and restore the structure of the matted fur. They made sure that the skins never got wet or damp from condensation from breathing. A dry bison skin could save your life in the steppe, even without a fire. If you appreciate the skill of ancient leather workers, please like this video. What if I told you that Native Americans slept fully clothed, but not in the way you might think? We are used to wearing pajamas or thermal underwear at night, which fits snugly against the body. The Native Americans of the Great Plains used the principle of layering in their clothing even while sleeping, but with important caveats. The main rule was, you must take off your shoes and outer clothing that had gotten wet during the day before going to bed. Sleeping in clothes damp from sweat or snow was deadly dangerous, as moisture instantly drew away heat. At night, they wore special dry moccasins with soft fur lining inside, which were kept specifically for sleeping. It was essential to keep the feet warm, as the limbs froze the fastest due to the slowing of blood flow. Often, dry, soft grass or moss was stuffed inside these sleeping moccasins for additional air insulation. This created the effect of warm felt boots, which were also breathable and did not make the feet sweat. The main clothing for sleeping was often loose-fitting shirts and leggings, made of the softest suede. Suede is a unique breathable material that can quickly wick excess moisture away from the body. Unlike modern synthetic fabrics, natural leather adapts to the temperature of the human body. It does not create a dangerous greenhouse effect, which can cause a person to sweat at first and then freeze. An important detail was that sleepwear had to be as loose as possible, almost baggy. Tight clothing constricts blood vessels and disrupts blood circulation, which inevitably leads to rapid cooling of the extremities. Loose shirts allowed warm air to circulate freely around the torso, heating up from the skin. This created another air layer under the heavy fur blanket. The belt, which tightly fastened the clothing during the day, was usually loosened or removed altogether at night. This was done so as not to compress the blood vessels in the waist and abdomen. Hot blood flow had to freely deliver heat from the heart to the tips of the fingers and toes. The Indians understood the physiology of their bodies perfectly and cherished the warmth of living blood. Any obstacle in the way of blood flow meant the risk of frostbite at night. During sleep, the head was often covered with the edge of a blanket or even a soft fur hat. A huge amount of heat escapes through an uncovered head, especially if the rest of the body is wrapped up. Some tribes used special hoods sewn onto winter capes that could be pulled over the forehead. This also allowed them to breathe warm air heated by their own bodies, which protected their lungs. For small children, special closed sleeping bags were sewn from the soft skins of small animals. Hare fur or wildcat skins were incredibly warm, soft, and light for a child. A baby wrapped up like this could be placed next to you under the blanket without fear of crushing them with a heavy bison skin. This provided the baby with double heating from their sleeping bag and from the warm body of their parent on the side. In the morning, immediately after waking up in a cold teepee, sleeping clothes were changed into daytime clothes if activity was planned. But often, in particularly severe frosts, the distinction between daytime and nighttime clothing was blurred in order to conserve heat. The main and only criterion for choosing clothing was always that the material be completely dry. If the shirt was dry, it could be worn for both sleeping and hunting. Do you prefer to sleep in the cool under a warm blanket or in a warm room under a light sheet? In the next chapter, we will discuss how the Indians managed the fire so that it would keep them warm all night. The fire in a teepee was never a huge roaring bonfire, as we often see in Hollywood westerns. In reality, a large fire inside a dwelling would be deadly dangerous due to the risk of fire and unbearable heat. It was a small, compact, and, most importantly, carefully controlled source of heat. Only special types of wood that burned slowly, evenly, and very hot were used for nighttime heating. Hard, deciduous wood such as oak, ash, or maple were best suited for this purpose, as they did not shoot sparks. They produced a lot of dense coals that retained heat for a long time, even after the flames had died down. The hearth was always located strictly in the geometric center of the dwelling, directly under the smoke hole at the top of the cone. The fire pit was often lined with large river stones, which played a crucial role as heat accumulators. During the evening, while the fire was burning actively, these stones heated up significantly, absorbing energy. At night, when the fire began to die down, the stones continued to release the accumulated gentle heat into the space for many hours. This smoothed out sharp temperature changes and worked like a modern heating battery. At night, the fire was deliberately preserved, using an ancient technique for retaining heat. The red coals were raked into a pile and covered with a thick layer of gray ash. This limited the access of oxygen to the fuel and slowed down the combustion process tenfold. The log under the ash did not burn, but slowly smoldered until morning, maintaining a high temperature inside. In the morning, the hostess only had to stir the ashes with a stick and throw in a bunch of dry grass for the flame to instantly reignite. This method of controlling the fire required great skill, experience, and intuitive knowledge of the properties of different types of wood. The fire could not be allowed to go out completely, otherwise it would be deadly cold in the teepee by morning. But too strong a flame at night was also unacceptable because of the risk of sparks falling on the sleepers. One accidental spark could burn expensive bison skins or instantly ignite the dry grass bedding. The balance between warmth and safety was strictly maintained. Sometimes for long winter nights, they used so-called night logs, specially selected large pieces of trunk. Such a thick log without knots could burn with an even, steady flame for several hours at a time. They were placed in the coals just before bedtime, carefully positioned so that they would not roll away. This saved the inhabitants from having to wake up every hour to maintain the fire and allowed everyone to get a good night's sleep. A good night log was valued no less than a successful hunt. The smoke from a properly built fire, obeying the laws of physics, rose vertically without filling the living space. If the smoke began to spread along the bottom and sting the eyes, it meant a mistake in ventilation or a change in the wind. In such cases, someone had to get up, go out into the cold, and adjust the smoke vents outside the teepee. Clean air without smoke was as important for safe sleep as warmth itself. In the longhouses of the Iroquois and other forest tribes, the heating system was arranged differently, as many families lived there. The fire burned in a long common corridor where there was a whole chain of several hearths. These fires heated the living quarters on both sides of the passageway, creating a warm microclimate. There, too, they relied mainly on powerful coals, which gave off soft infrared radiation. Open, bright flames were used mainly for cooking and lighting the house in the evening. Preparing the right firewood was one of the main and most labor-intensive tasks in the winter. Dry, aged firewood was literally worth its weight in gold in the steppe. Raw or rotten wood produced little heat, a lot of acrid smoke, and dangerous hot sparks. Experienced women and children knew where to find high-quality standing deadwood, which was best suited for nighttime heating. Every trip for firewood was a contribution to the family's survival. The ability to handle fire was not innate. It was taught and honed from an early age. Every child knew how to stack branches in a teepee or well-shaped to get maximum heat with minimum fuel. Economy was a way of life, because wood supplies were limited. It was a real science of economical use of resources on which the life of the tribe depended. Are you ready for a shocking truth that turns our understanding of winter upside down? Snow, which we are accustomed to thinking of as the main source of cold and problems, was the most important building material for the Indians to preserve heat. When deep snow fell on the plains, the tribes did not clear it around their dwellings down to the ground as we clear our paths. On the contrary, they deliberately shoveled it against the walls of the teepee, creating a high, dense wall. This snow wall could reach a meter or more in height, encircling the dwelling. The secret lies in the physical structure of snow. It consists of many ice crystals with air between them. This immobile air makes a snowdrift an excellent heat insulator, similar in properties to modern foam or fiberglass. The snow mound around the base of the teepee reliably blocked the coldest and most dangerous ground winds. It sealed the joint between the leather cover and the ground, where icy drafts most often occur. Inside the dwelling, carefully covered with snow on the outside, it became noticeably quieter and much warmer. The wind could no longer blow precious heat out through the bottom edge of the skins, and the drafts at the feet disappeared. The temperature at floor level rose by several degrees, which was critically important for those who slept on the ground. This simple action transformed a light, drafty summer dwelling into a reliable and cozy winter fortress. The peoples of the subarctic and far north went even further in their mastery of snow. Sometimes hunters built temporary shelters entirely out of snow blocks if they did not have a teepee with them. But even when living in chums or wigwams, they always and everywhere used snow for additional insulation of the walls. It was an absolutely free, effective, and endless resource, available right under their feet in any quantity. Inside the teepee, the snow lying outside did not melt thanks to the inner lining and the air gap between the skins. The outer skin of the dwelling remained cold enough to prevent the snow from turning into water. If the snow had begun to melt from the heat of the fire, the water would have wet the skins, causing them to rot and spoil. The temperature balance was maintained perfectly. It was warm inside, while the outside wall remained icy. The entrance to the dwelling was also often modified by equipping it with a snow tunnel or a windbreak wall. This prevented direct gusts of wind from entering every time someone opened the door. The snow wall forced the wind to bend around the entrance, creating an aerodynamic calm zone in front of the door. Simple but effective laws of aerodynamics were used by Native Americans to improve the comfort of their daily lives. Sometimes they deliberately trampled the snow around their dwellings, creating a dense, hard crust for easier walking. This made it easy to move around the camp, but loose snow was used to insulate the walls. Fresh, fluffy snow contains the most air between the snowflakes and retains heat best. Compacted snow turns into ice and conducts cold much faster. Of course, in the spring, when the snow began to melt under the sun, get wet and heavy, it had to be urgently shoveled away from the walls. Wet, heavy snow lost its insulating properties and could seriously damage the skin with dampness. But in the harshest and darkest winter months, it was man's best ally and protector. Nature itself provided people with the ideal material to protect themselves from its own cruel whims. Have you ever tried to build a shelter out of snow as a child and noticed how warm it was inside? In the next chapter, we will learn how the arrangement of people inside a dwelling affected the survival of the entire group. Loneliness in the winter steppe was not just a sad state of affairs. It was a guaranteed death sentence. The Indians survived in this icy hell solely thanks to their close-knit community and their ability to physically share warmth. Inside the teepee, sleeping places were always arranged strictly in a circle, with feet toward the central hearth. People slept quite close to each other, literally shoulder to shoulder, combining their heat fields into one whole. A lone person would freeze much faster, losing precious energy into the void. On particularly cold, crackling nights, families often gave up their individual beds and slept under one large shared shelter. The warmth of several living bodies heated the enclosed space under the skins much more efficiently than the body of one person. It was a simple but reliable biological heater that worked all night without interruption. Children and the elderly, whose heat exchange was weaker, were always placed in the very center of the group. There, at the core of this living heap, it was warmest and safest. Young and strong warriors often slept closer to the exit or on the outer edges of the common bed. With their strong bodies, they created a living shield for the more vulnerable members of the family, taking on the chill from the walls. This arrangement was instinctive, ancient, and strictly observed by all. It was an unwritten rule where strength served as protection for weakness. Caring for the weak was fundamental to the survival and continuation of the entire tribe. Even the dogs, which usually lived outside in the camp, played an important role in this heating system. In severe frosts, they were allowed inside the teepee, where they lay at people's feet or at the edges of the bed. The warm, fluffy bodies of the animals served as excellent living hot water bottles, with a temperature higher than that of humans. There is even an expression, 3 dogs night, meaning a frost so severe that you need to sleep with 3 dogs to stay warm. This mutually beneficial coexistence helped people survive the coldest and darkest hours before dawn. In the longhouses of the Iroquois, where many related families lived under one roof, the population density was even higher. The huge shared space was warmed by the breath and body heat of dozens of people at the same time. The walls tightly covered with thick bark and the low ceilings on the sleeping platforms reliably kept the heat inside. Collective living turned the house into a single organism, making winter less frightening. There was simply no loneliness there. Interestingly, a purely psychological factor also played a huge role in the physical sensation of warmth. The feeling of a comrade's shoulder, the calm breathing of relatives audible nearby, gave a deep sense of security. It has been scientifically proven that fear and stress cause blood vessels to constrict, and a person gets cold much faster. Calmness and confidence and support help the body to better regulate heat exchange and relax. Guests, if they happen to find themselves in a teepee, always received the most honorable and warmest place. Usually, this was the space directly opposite the entrance, behind the hearth, where there were never any drafts. Hospitality was a strict law of the steppe, and the host could sacrifice their comfort for the sake of a stranger. Refusing a tired traveler warmth and shelter was considered an unthinkable crime, for which the spirits could punish them. The order of going to bed was also not chaotic, but a collective ritual. Everyone tried to go to bed at about the same time to minimize walking and opening doors. The camp fell silent almost instantly, falling asleep as a single organism, conserving its strength. Unnecessary movement created drafts and let warm air escape, so discipline was necessary to preserve heat. In the morning, the women, usually grandmothers or mothers, were always the first to get up to stoke the smoldering fire and heat water. While the rest of the family was still lying under warm skins, the temperature in the teepee began to rise slowly. This allowed the children and men to wake up in relative comfort rather than in the freezing cold. Mutual assistance and division of responsibilities were the solid foundation of everyday life. The hardest part of the day was not hunting or traveling, but the need to crawl out from under the warm skins into the frosty morning air. By dawn, the temperature in the teepee could drop to 0 or even below as the fire burned out. The transition from the cozy warmth of bed to the aggressive cold of the day had to be quick and decisive. Indians never lingered in bed, delaying the moment of rising, as this was considered a weakness. The first thing a person did, without even getting up, was to put on their outer clothing, which had been lying nearby under the skins all night. If the clothes were carelessly left out in the cold, putting them on in the morning would be painfully uncomfortable and dangerous. Warmed by the heat of one's own body, they maintained a comfortable temperature and did not sap energy. Thanks to skillful practice, putting on warm clothes took only a few seconds. This was followed by washing, which was often done with snow or ice water from a water skin. This harsh procedure instantly invigorated, dispelled sleep, and stimulated active blood circulation. After contact with the snow, the skin began to burn, and the feeling of external cold gave way to internal heat. Such harsh hardening was part of everyday life from an early age, strengthening the immune system. Immediately after waking up, it was necessary to start moving actively. Standing still was not allowed. Physical activity started the body's internal metabolic reactor at full power. Women immediately took up housework and cooking, while men went to check the equipment or feed the horses. Immobility on a cold morning was unacceptable as it led to freezing. Eating hot food or drinking herbal tea was a mandatory and urgent part of the morning routine. Heat had to enter the body to warm it from the inside and start digestion. Thick hot meat broth provided the necessary energy and warmth for several hours of work. It was the fuel without which it was impossible to go out into the cold. Caring for exposed skin was also critically important in winter. The face, nose, and hands were often thickly coated with animal fat to protect against chapping and frostbite. The layer of fat created a thin protective film that reduced moisture evaporation and heat loss from the skin's surface. It was an ancient and effective analog of modern protective winter cream. Footwear was checked particularly carefully and meticulously because the ability to walk depended on it. If moccasins did not dry completely overnight or froze, they had to be urgently stretched and warmed by the fire. Putting on stiff frozen shoes meant guaranteed frostbite in the first hour. Wise warriors often had a spare pair of dry shoes and replacement grass insoles for just such cases. A quick morning inspection of the teepee helped to identify any insulation problems that had arisen during the night. If snow had been blown in somewhere, or the skin had come away from the ground, creating a draft, this was corrected immediately. Preparations for the next night began that morning, without delay. Attention to the smallest details was the key to a peaceful and safe night's sleep. In the northeast of the continent, where the Iroquois and Huron lived, the climate dictated completely different conditions than in the plains. Here, among dense forests and deep snow, the approach to wintering was radically different from the nomadic lifestyle of the plains. The Indians of these places did not build light portable teepees, but rather huge stationary dwellings resembling fortresses. These structures were called longhouses and were covered with thick elm or cedar bark. Such houses could reach 100 meters in length and became a refuge for an entire clan for the whole winter. The entire structure of this house was engineered to maximize heat retention for a large community. The frame was made from hundreds of flexible trunks of young trees, which were dug into the ground and tied together with an arch at the top. This powerful skeleton was then covered with large, pre-prepared layers of bark. Elm bark was chosen for a reason. It is an excellent natural material, dense, rigid, and resistant to wind. The sheets of bark were laid overlapping, like tiles on modern roofs, and tightly tied with bast. As a result, the walls were multi-layered and completely windproof, even for the strongest storms. Inside the house, wide sleeping platforms raised above the ground stretched along the long walls. This was an ingenious solution based on the laws of physics. Cold, heavy air always accumulated at the bottom on the earthen floor. People slept and rested at a height of half a meter or a meter in a comfortable zone. Warm air from numerous hearths rose upward and washed over these sleeping places, creating a warm cloud. The space under the platforms was not wasted either. It was used to store dry firewood and food supplies. The firewood dried out perfectly there before use, and the baskets with belongings created an additional physical barrier against the cold from the ground. The sleeping areas themselves were often separated by woven mats and skins, creating a kind of private cabin or compartment. This gave families the necessary privacy in the dormitory and helped to retain the warmth of their breath in a small space. The roof of the longhouse was sloped and arched so that snow would not accumulate on it in dangerous quantities, threatening collapse. However, the small layer of snow that remained on the roof was welcomed by the residents as additional free insulation. Special square openings with a clever adjustment system were left in the roof for smoke to escape. These hatches had movable valves made of pieces of bark that could be opened and closed from below with long poles. This allowed for precise control of the draft and prevented excess heat from escaping. The hearths were located in a chain strictly along the central axis of the house, several meters apart from each other. One such fire usually served two families living in compartments directly opposite each other. The fire in these hearths burned constantly, day and night, maintaining a steady above-zero temperature throughout the entire huge room. The smoke, rising upward and accumulating in a thick layer under the vaulted ceiling, also helped to retain heat, acting as a blanket. Of course, the longhouses were often smoky and people's eyes watered, but this was considered an acceptable price to pay for living in warmth. The thick smoke also preserved the wooden frame structures and repelled harmful insects and rodents. In winter, life was bustling inside the house, as people only went outside when necessary. Here they cooked food, made tools, sewed clothes, and told endless stories. The longhouse became a whole world, reliably protected by walls from the deadly cold outside. The entrances to the dwelling were located only at the ends of the building and always had double doors or curtains made of heavy skins. The space between them formed vestibules, which were often filled with firewood to the very top. These vestibules served as a buffer zone, blocking the frosty air when people entered. Cold air from the street was trapped there and warmed up without immediately penetrating the living area. The entire life support system was thought out by our ancestors down to the smallest detail. The Indians never tried to fight or conquer nature. Instead, they became an integral part of it. Their amazing ability to sleep warmly in the middle of endless ice was based on a deep, almost mystical understanding of the world around them. They knew the physical properties of all available materials: fur, leather, wood, and snow. They used every resource to maximum efficiency without wasting anything. Where Europeans saw a threat, Native Americans saw an opportunity. But the main factor in their survival was the incredible physical and mental adaptation of the people themselves to the harsh conditions. Over generations of evolution, their bodies had become accustomed to sudden temperature changes that would probably knock a modern city dweller off their feet. The metabolism of the indigenous people switched to a special mode in winter, effectively burning fatty foods for internal heating. They knew how to instantly relax and fall into a deep sleep in conditions that today seem extreme and unfit for life. It was a biological fusion with their environment. Psychological attitude and philosophy played a decisive role in this equation, perhaps even more than clothing. They did not perceive the cold as an evil enemy, but accepted it as a natural state of nature in which one must learn to live. Panic, fuss, and self-pity killed faster in the winter forest than any frost. Only icy calm and a clear understanding of their actions gave them confidence in tomorrow. They believed that winter was a time of rest for the earth, not a time of death. This unique culture of survival was passed on not through books, but through strict upbringing and the personal example of elders. From infancy, children watched their parents prepare their beds for the night and learned this art from the cradle, copying the movements of adults. A mistake in preparing for bed or carelessness in clothing was the best teacher. But the price of such a mistake was too high. Therefore, young Indians learned quickly, conscientiously, and for life. Knowledge was hammered into their heads by the cold itself. Today we use high-tech sleeping bags, membrane fabrics, and synthetic insulation to go hiking in the mountains. But the basic principles of heat conservation remain the same as they were thousands of years ago. Insulation from the ground, layering, and protection from the wind. The ancient knowledge of Native Americans forms the basis of all modern science on survival in the wild. They proved in practice that human intelligence and willpower are stronger than any, even the most severe frost. The history of these peoples is a great story of the victory of spirit and mind over the harsh, merciless elements. Their experience clearly shows us that comfort is not the absence of difficulties, but the ability to deal with them competently. Even when everything around is frozen and seems dead, a person is capable of creating their own small, warm core of life. And in this core, despite everything, life goes on. We have seen that the secret of the Indians' warm sleep is not magic, but technology and experience. From the construction of teepees to the tanning of hides, from fire management to the use of snow, everything was part of a single system. This system allowed people not just to survive, but to live a full life in the harshest corners of the planet. They proved that a home is not walls, but the ability to create warmth wherever you are. What other aspects of the daily life of the indigenous peoples of North America would you like to learn about in future episodes? Write your suggestions in the comments and be sure to subscribe to the channel to continue our journey into the past.